I'll tell you what Aaron told me in July of 2014, because it's on page 4 of our report. There isn't a single CEO out there that doesn't appreciate this strange new world that they're trying to lead through. I was going to actually invite our two guests and two panelists to introduce themselves, but kindly Aaron has done that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move on quickly. But I do want to make this a big conversation. And I think there is a significant follow-on from much of what you've just been hearing from Erica, from John Brown this morning, and from Lindsay as well. This is part of a continuum, and what I'm going to do is introduce you to data and evidence that has emerged, and both the panelists have already read it. It's out there in the public space, which really confirms a direction of travel which is deeply worrying, but it builds on the kind of things we've just been hearing from Erica. We've got a problem. I'd say it's bigger than just a problem. This is now an existential issue. So I hope my slides can go up there. Please, Matt or somebody. They'll come up in a moment. But what I want to underscore is the continuum from what we heard from Lindsay this morning. We have to transform the system without crashing. Our findings say exactly that. We are at the limits. Exactly. The new norm is very different from the norm of 2 or 3 years ago. And I've put a red background up here for thinking the unthinkable and how to, and preparing for it smartly, simply because, in our view, this is a red alert. I left the BBC by choice about 2.5 years ago, at the time that Crimea had been seized by Russia. Then we had Ebola, when Médecins Sans Frontières warned of what was going to happen, and the World Health Organization said, no, it's not going to be a problem. Then we had this thing called the digital caliphate, which emerged in Mosul, which no one seemed to know about. Then we had the 60% reduction in oil prices. And Michael Ignatieff, the professor of practice at Harvard University, came to London, and he said, we're beginning to see, very quickly, a new normal. So let me set your mind on that, because when John Brown, and I don't think he's here unfortunately, writes here about how companies succeed by engaging radically with society, I would say it's not really the company, it's actually the human beings inside. Because I set out with Chris, who's sitting at the back there, helping curate this. I set out to find out what the problem is in boardrooms, what the problem is in structures of government and in companies. Why were a lot of issues that I've just mentioned and many others simply not on the agenda and not being thought about? So it's actually the human issue, the recalibration of human software as opposed to the recalibration of the structures. And when John Brown talked about the future will be better for being bold, we have a problem. The danger of the economy and economic activity being reduced and companies damaged. That's one of our findings. This is now an existential threat to both governments and also to companies in ways which most of those at the top don't really want to understand. Notice this is about preparing for it smartly. And I'm just going to talk for about 8 or 9 minutes. And please start filing your ideas on Twitter or get an idea so we can move it forward quickly. When the IMF, literally a month ago, warned about unleashing a global revolt, negative economic and political forces are at work. When you see in the FT a couple of days ago, when they endorsed one presidential candidate, the old world of the past, 70 years, is fraying, maybe even breaking down. That's why we view this as potentially an existential threat. It's not us who is saying that. We've got more than 2,000 pages of transcripts with very senior people, all of whom have talked to us off the record, behind closed doors, confidentially, and many of them are deeply scared about what they're trying to do, whether run a government or run a major company. Because as one said, I feel like an imposter. I know what the shareholders want, I know what the board want, but I know I can't deliver it in this new environment. Now, obviously, I'm giving you this rather dramatic headlines, but there is a very clear direction of travel here, which I want to share with you. And a few weeks ago, and this is changing amazingly fast, let me tell you, amazingly fast. Sometimes, and listening to Erica, I feel that much of what you've just said is beginning to happen. There is a change of mood in companies. We've sensed it in the last handful of weeks. But when at a meeting, it happened to be up a mountain, but nothing to do with Davos, of high net worth individuals, chief executives and others, are discussing this over 46 hours, and one of the takeaways is the system will be fundamentally disrupted. We must prepare ourselves. What if everything we assume is not enough? Now, when I set off down this track with Chris, I didn't expect this to be as bad as we've discovered. But it's those at the heart and at the top who are telling us how worried they are, and hopefully we'll hear more from our panelists about their views as well, because they've had this responsibility at the top. But when you hear from President Obama in his last UN General Assembly remarks, talking that governing more difficult, tensions quicker to surface, explosions in social media, expectations rising faster than government can deliver, the old assumptions are no longer valid. There is now a new normal out there. There is a new normal when the German government, at the end of August, having talked about what it called a period of tranquility before the Russia problem and the migration problem, has issued instructions for every German citizen to have enough water and food for 10 days. That is not something which the normal of the last 20 years has assumed. That is because of the existential threats. I'm not going to define what kind of things they are. When normally not overstated Singapore, the Deputy Prime Minister, DPM Tharman, on the record at the Singapore summit, literally about 5 weeks ago, said during a discussion about unsettled, unpredictable, is mediocre growth the only certainty? He talked about helplessness and despondency, plenty of pessimism around, and the danger that leaderships are, in his words, going to get into a funk. So let me give you as much as I can of headlines of our takeaways. It's all peer-reviewed, it's all documented, and I'll give you the URL at the end. But this is about where things are going now. And if I could have the slides back, please. It is about two key words, which I've already heard in a few hours this morning, about purpose and values. And that is not something we'd have heard a few months ago as openly as I'm hearing now in brainstormings among chairmen and chief executives, maybe only a handful. What is the purpose of our company now? What are the values which we are going to uphold? When you get high net worth individuals saying, we don't like the value necessarily of a quarterly return, we are looking for something else, then something is changing. When I hear a chief executive of a major global corporate who's involved in the consumer business say something which would never have been said by this person, certainly a few months ago, we are now in danger of creating angry citizens and angry consumers. And that's going to affect the way we do business and the survival of our business, potentially. So our report is available on Thinking the Unthinkable. And this is just proof that what I'm saying is not assertions. It's not designed to enjoy a few hours in New York City. This is hard-won information. And as people have said to us, it's the data which is the strength here, and it's driving the analysis. The World Today in London, which is the Chatham House document, the bi-monthly publication, I'm putting that up there really because this is what the cartoonist said just before Brexit for the London conference of Chatham House when they asked us to summarize our findings. The cartoonist showed large numbers of executives in their dark suits struggling behind their blindfolds. And that's what we have detected very strongly. So the cartoonist is absolutely right on that. What are the main findings that we've come away with? It's not about the systems. It is about three critical issues of culture, mindset, and behavior. And what is fascinating is it's those at the top who are now beginning to say that as well. We have to change. We realize we've got to do it. But how are we going to do it? But our main finding is this, that the conformity which has traditionally up to now got people to the top is now disqualifying large numbers of people at the top from understanding the enormity of the change and the new normal, however you define it, of what is happening. And I'm not just talking about Brexit, and I'm not just talking about Trump. Look what might happen in so many countries around Europe, and look at the backlash we're beginning to see, even with South Africa withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. It's not necessarily a failure of leadership now, it's the failing not to identify, accept, and recalibrate the extent of what is happening. If I tell you that based on our research in our first publication, when we did the report, we did the report before the Brexit vote, and what we said back in the middle of June is this: in the United Kingdom, a majority could vote in June to leave the European Union. In the United States, the presumptive Republican presidential candidate is Donald Trump. Britain out of the EU, President Trump, and this is the important bit, to express incredulity is not a political judgment. Until a few weeks ago, what many viewed as outlandish unthinkables were not even being considered or investigated as part of corporate or political risk assessments. Not being investigated as part of corporate or political risk assessments. Let me take this further, and I'm obviously just giving you headlines very quickly. It's not just about unthinkables, it's about unpalatables. Often the evidence is there. The question, therefore, is why don't those at the top act upon it? And that's because of the frozen middle in so many areas, for reasons I'm about to explain. How deep is the new challenge? Let me quote to you the scale of that challenge in the words of Chris Donnelly, who directs the Institute for Statecraft. He put it this way, and we quote it right at the beginning: the rate of change we're going through at the moment is comparable to what happens in wartime. Wartime, yet we think we're at peace. The global pace of change is overcoming the capacity of national and international institutions to handle it. So that's the scale of the problem. And why is it the problem? Because of what one very senior figure described like this, a ghastly word. We're seeing the de-responsibilization of civil servants, public servants, and people within companies. People are offloading responsibility rather than contributing. They are conforming. They are the frozen middle. They are the executive myopia. And those at the top don't really realize just how frozen that middle is. The 9 points I want to leave with you are this. Large numbers, everyone at the top is now overwhelmed by the scale, the volume, the depth, the profound nature of these multiple and intense pressures. There's now institutional conformity, which is acting against the possibility of handling much of this data and working out the implications, which proves itself in terms of willful blindness, groupthink, risk aversion, and this is really very critical in everything. Fear of making career-limiting moves. When the economy is wobbly, you don't want to lose your job. So you keep your head down and you don't say what you might be thinking as an expert. Reactionary mindsets, cognitive overload and dissonance, and above all, denial. If anyone disagrees with that, please tell me, because so far we've not had any pushback. And so this session with the two panelists and all of you, and I hope some of you have already got some thoughts in your mind, is so what? We haven't got the data yet. We're looking at what is happening in companies, what's happening in public service, what happens next, because this is moving very fast. The long term is a lot shorter. It's not 20 years, it's probably 20 months or 20 weeks, maybe even 20 days. And what are the solutions? That's too grand to come up with. If any of you got solutions, please tell us. We'd love to know. But in all of this, what we're looking for, I think, and the word that keeps coming through time and time again, there are a couple of words here: courage and humility. And that doesn't come easy to most leaders in the current environment, many of whom are worried about their jobs, and the safe space in which to discuss all of this. So, one of the critical takeaways has to be this: language. I've heard chief executives say, that's a wacky idea. Why doesn't he or she say, no, it's a wise idea? That's a bonkers idea. Actually, no, it's a bold idea. And maverick, why not talk about things as visionary? And I'm talking about words I've heard very senior people use. So this is the framing which somehow has to be got over with different ideas like DARE units. And there's someone here from the Dutch Foreign Ministry. They've just started thinking about how to create a new DARE unit inside the Foreign Ministry, a foresight department, and red teaming as well. So I leave you with this. Those are the aims and what we've discovered. But one of the things that is coming through, and I'm moving much faster than I planned, is reverse mentoring. And this picks up what we just heard from Erica, the power now of millennials. They have a very different view about what's happening. They don't like it. And therefore, actually, the next generation have the power to somehow get some kind of level of improvement, accessibility, broadness, depth, which is lacking at the moment. Or what one CEO of one major bank called, we've got to have youthization. I did say 3 times, do you really mean that? Anyway, so that's the image I want to leave you with as we discuss. Please give us your ideas. And Aaron has already asked me, how can leaders communicate existential threats without paralyzing their organizations? So for both of you, that's a question to consider. But that's the image I want you to go away with. It is that those at the top themselves are uncomfortable. They are themselves uncomfortable. But they're now trying to work out how to move forward. We're in a safe space at the moment, but things are moving very significantly in a way which is quite hopeful in small doses. What has to happen, and I think Lindsay's working on this, is how you find the possibility to create a group and a community and a process on these kind of findings, whether us, whether Lindsay, whether John Brown, and what Erica has just told you as well. So we're bringing it together in the next half hour. Thank you. So Karina and Alessandro, what's your view of what you kindly have read the paper? And I'll come through with a couple of other questions here in a moment.
Well, first of all, thank you, Nik, for having me here in this panel, and amazing thoughts. But the first thing for me, and in some way I will repeat things that we heard this morning, and also from you. I think we are facing a generation issue. Most of the top leaders in the world now were born and educated in what I'm going to say in the old game. A game that is hierarchical, predictable, simple, sequential, and with command and control, I can deal with this game. And in this game, institutions play a gigantic role. But the game has changed, and has really changed. And
at high speed.
Is now happening, you know, and faster, like you said. This new game is transparent, is connected, is interdependent, is complex, is unpredictable. And who has the power are the individuals, not the institutions anymore. So it's difficult to expect from these leaders, recognizing that some of them are changing, are trying to change, but it's very difficult to expect from them to really deal with the situation. You know, I would like just not to be too long, but to do a joke from 2. So from forecasting, the old game is everybody invests a lot of money to predict things. Well, bad news. This is impossible to be done anymore, in my opinion. You need to, from forecasting to adapting, because things are not going to happen like you predicted, more and more. Well, from be big, that you know how big your company is, this really does not matter anymore. How fast you are means something in this new game. From a company that is, or an organization that is result-oriented, you need to be purpose-oriented. You know, purpose is something that engages people and helps with the solution. Because when you don't have the solution and you are not ready for a change in the environment, you look to yourself and to your purpose, and the answer is relatively easy. You know how you think, so you know what is the right thing to be done. From we and them, and my generation learned that we in the company need to deal with the stakeholders. So there is a split between we and them. From we and them, we need to understand us, because there are no barriers between the organizations and company.
But Alessandro, do you think those at the top can get over the conformity which has got them there?
No, I think that, well, again, as I said, they are trying, Nik, but I think that it's very difficult for a top leader that learn this old game to recognize that we are doing bad things. And I was very happy to hear here this morning, and of course everybody here knows, that companies, organizations, they do a lot of mistakes, a lot of bad things, not because we intend to do it, but because, you know, between comma, that word happens.
But can we focus on the recalibration that's needed to understand that the new normal is something very different?
Well, it's huge, and the recalibration starts with the leaders by themselves. They need to recognize that the way that they are managing or the way that they see the world is not working anymore, is not going to work. So I think that it's like a personal work, you know.
Maybe you can introduce some of those other points as we get some other thoughts from the floor. Karina, your thoughts, particularly as you're involved in investment on different sides of the fence.
Yes, and I'm afraid I have to give a health warning, which is that although I do serve on the board of ENI, and it does occupy 3/4 of my time, because it's a very, very active board, I am not an authorized spokesman of the person. I'm speaking here strictly in a personal capacity. That being said, what I want to share is some specific insights that I've developed from having been on the investor side for 20 years, and then having crossed over to the corporate side, and in particular in the board. And to me, what's really interesting, and this is not just from my own personal experience of serving on a board, but also of having the opportunity to talk with lots of other board members who serve on other companies, and we all have, you know, variations on the same theme, which is going back to the question that that Aaron had initially, and I don't know if we can...
Existential threats.
Well, how does a leader, I forget how you worded it, but it was something about, I don't know if we can get it back there.
There you are. How can leaders communicate existential threats without paralyzing their organizations?
Right. I mean, imagine you're on an airplane, you're airborne, and the pilot says, ladies and gentlemen, in case you were worried about safety, let me just tell you, we're safe, and this is why. And it's kind of like that. I mean, you know, by and large, there's a reluctance to kind of lift the lid and reveal the extent to which there is, you know, a serious existential threat, because even though, and of course, I don't think any self-respecting CEO would come forward and lift that lid without having a ready answer.
Well, Paul Pullman of Unilever has done that.
No, but let me finish. They'll do it when they've thought it through. They're not going to say, oops, we have a problem, we'll come back to you in a year's time when we've got an answer. They'll have thought it through, come up with the answer, but you do expose yourself to your answer being challenged, right? And if you're a listed company, investors are very nimble. They can say, you know what, that's a pretty good answer, but actually I think I'm just gonna put my money in a different sector altogether. Why should I bet, let's just say for argument's sake, it's an oil and gas company, why should I bet on you transforming your business model and delivering a different kind of sustainable and accessible energy when I could just put my money somewhere else?
Let me move the microphone around. How many people would like to come in? It's a very long room, but put up your hands or send a tweet, please. Anna Tunkel, where are you? Yeah, could I just get a microphone there? In a moment, Anna. But just to be clear from both of you, do you have a problem with the findings of what we've got, what Lord Brown has come up with, what Lindsay's come up with? No. It's that bad?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think your 9 points were just absolutely nailed it.
All right, if anyone's got a 10th point or doesn't like any of the 9 points, please tell us. And I won't tell you you're in the minority. Please, Anna. Right, and microphone, please.
Hi, I'm Anna Tunkel. I'm with APCO Worldwide. We're a global consulting firm with 34 offices around the world. And first of all, thank you for highlighting what we've been hearing in boardrooms from Beijing to Brussels, from Moscow to Singapore. I think it's particularly relevant. And I think the challenge is, and that's what I actually wanted to ask you, is how do you convey that sense of urgency and mentality shift to encompass, you know, leaders from emerging markets? Because I think you've quoted Paul Pullman from Unilever. I think the understanding of those black swans and new risks is very relevant to what's happening now in the West, but I think it's globally applicable. So how do you change the mindsets in Beijing and in New Delhi and create that dialogue that is really broad and all-encompassing?
Thanks, Anna. Anyone else? Microphone here, please. Anyone else, so I can see and we can keep moving fast. The issue of mindset, not just in Beijing, but everywhere. Can mindsets be changed on this? Do you believe by those who are currently at the top or near the top? Alessandro.
I think, yes, not all of them, but I think, yes, few of them can change their mindset. If they are open to recognize that, you know, I didn't have the answers and I need to ask for some help, you know.
But if you imagine where you were as a chief executive, those two words, courage and humility, is that something you can easily show to your employees?
No, especially humility. I think we learned that to be a successful executive, you need to have all the answers. And the only thing you can say is, sorry guys, I don't know. Is there someone in the room that knows more than me? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to hear this from a CEO. I hope you heard sometimes. And I'm sure that we are going to hear more and more. But the fact, Nick, is that we're talking about this early. Most of CEOs are saying that after a problem happened. And we know that in all companies, we have several problems. So why don't talk about them?
So, Karina, I'm using the word, we haven't used it in the report, this kind of oppressive environment internally, which means, and you say you back the 9 points, which means that somehow those have got to be reversed, maybe through the next generation, and those who are not worried about their careers, taking risks, but hearing about what Putin's going to do next, what the existential threat to the company may be. Have you thought about this, Mr. or Madam Chief Executive? Is that doable with humility and courage or not?
For sure, it's doable. If it can be done, it's a totally different thing.
I think so. One thing that I've seen happen very successfully in my own company, not that I'm here to be a shill for the company, is the CEO blogging with the staff and having people challenge him and him respond to them. And specifically on issues, this is the youthization thing, on things about sustainable development, on about transforming the company. And you should see, I love reading this blog because I see people writing back saying, "Dear Claudio, it's so inspiring to me as a young person in this company to feel that we are using our human capital to put to the service of humanity and deliver, clean energy to Africa," or something. That's really cutting across all those frozen layers in the middle to the young people, to get them fired up and to really take them and change the culture of the company.
So that's possible, is it?
I think it's possible, but it has to start with the CEO wanting to do it, which is not a given.
All right, please. And then Linda Rogers, where are you, please? Because we can get the microphone to you. There, over there. Can we get the microphone here, please? Yeah.
So Stephen Birkenfeld from Barclays and on the BSR board. I will push back a little bit because I think there is a 10th point, and I think it may be the biggest point of all, and that's time. Right? I don't know a CEO that isn't working at, and maybe I'm personalizing this, at full capacity or beyond full capacity, right? Boards meet once a quarter. They should be meeting every other week, but board members don't have the time to do that. You say the information is all there. Why don't they act on it? Why aren't they analyzing this, recalibrating, resetting? It's not that they don't want to. It's not that they're willfully blind or conformity. It's that they don't have the opportunity to, the time to, because there's so many other things that they have to do.
Well,
right? Every organization has leaned down. People don't have extra hours in the day to say, okay, let me think about the unthinkable.
If I can tell you, that's one of the things that drove us. People I've known in high levels now who are saying we're overwhelmed, we're not making good decisions.
Yeah.
We can't keep up to pace with the volume and the proliferation of difficult challenges now. It's starting in 2014. So it's all very well saying there's got to be time, but actually the time cannot be created within the current systems. So anyone who's got ideas about how there can be a breathing space, a kind of ventilation for those at the top to reflect, it'd be great to know.
I've got one.
Please.
Because that was one of your first points, I think, is the overwhelmed. Yeah. Just speaking from personal experience, we spend so much time on quarterly reporting, so much time that we could otherwise be spending on thinking long-term thoughts. Please, can we just cut it in half so that we could devote that time to thinking about the existential threats facing the company?
But do you think that's beginning to move in that direction for the kind of reasons that Erica has highlighted, and certainly others behind closed doors, literally in the last few weeks have begun to highlight?
My experience, because I've sounded out investors on that very point, is that investors are quite fragmented on this point, partly because, particularly in emerging markets where there's still a big problem with the quality of reporting, it's considered that quarterly reporting is a way of holding management's feet to the fire and being transparent and accountable, blah, blah, blah. But it's gone too far, I think, and it's really undermined the effectiveness of decision making.
Alessandro, quarterly reporting.
Oh, I think is something that should be banished.
All right.
Sorry. And
Does anyone
and
want
I am an investor too. I used to be a CEO of a company, listed one, and I am also an investor. And the quarterly report is something that really slaved the
In the interest of balance, does anyone want to speak up for quarterly reporting in this room? All right, Linda, where are you, please? You have the microphone. And then to Andy Newham, please. Where are you, Andy? I can't see hands
I think
here.
he's way over in the other side.
Andy, can we get the microphone there, please?
Okay, great. Linda Rogers with Heifer International. I'm intrigued by the concept of reverse mentoring that you were talking about and how millennial employees can advise leadership and bypass the frozen middle. And what I was thinking is, can the same be applied to supply chains of our major consumer products? So instead of consumer brands moving upstream in their supply chain and bringing advice and help to people within workers of factories or farmers? Can the farmers advise the companies on the best way to operate their supply chain that benefits and is inclusive of the whole?
Have you got experience of reverse mentoring yourself in any way? Whichever organization you're in.
I don't think a significant example. I think we've got lots of examples that bridge from small farmers who are just individuals with a few acres and how to bring them into the formal marketplace. But I still think it's how do companies consider their own supply chain and think about that. So I was just intrigued if others have that concept.
What do you think of the concept of reverse mentoring?
I think it sounds great. It's obviously difficult to put in practice. The closest I've personally come to it, and it's not as authentic, I think, as what you're describing, is serving on stakeholder advisory boards of companies. And I've personally done that for a number of companies over the last 15 years, in oil and cement, in technology, in food, in utilities. And the companies get together a group of actually quite critical stakeholders from a range of different areas, and we come together and we basically challenge the CEO and challenge the senior management. It's not the same as going and getting somebody from the supply chain by any means, but some of the people on that stakeholder panel were themselves representatives of organizations that have quite capillary relationships in country, and so they were getting their intelligence from the field in a way that I as an investor couldn't.
Alessandro.
Well, I think it's a great idea, and I think you need to be humble enough to recognize that you have something to learn from someone that maybe is younger than you, that does not have the position you have, or a supplier. And I have a brief experience in my former company that used to still buys Brazilian ingredients from local communities. And we learn a lot from them, because imagine, we were used to call a big supplier and ask for a ton of these ingredients. And now we need to deal with 3,000 local communities that when it rains, they don't want to pick the seeds. And they bring their children to pick up things that in our society is something that we don't allow. But their children are learning to do what their parents are doing. So the only way to deal with this new supplier was together, to really sitting in the same room, not room forest in this case, and try to deal with what do you need and how can we help you,
the trouble
and learn
is,
again.
The trouble is that many inside companies have been very frank with us and said, it's all very well talking about this in theory. The trouble is put it into practice and it becomes a career limiting risk, because you're not sure whether that chief executive is going to survive and what will happen when he or she disappears. One chief executive said, this company has survived on crushing mavericks. Now we need to create them, to which you say, well, where are you going to find them if you've crushed them and got rid of them? And he wanted to shake the tree, and I said, if you shake the trees too much, you'll end up with no fruit. So what we see is significant tensions and contradictions, great ideas, but how do you put it into practice?
Well, I think you need to choose the ideas that make sense and are aligned with your purpose. And you can start in a part of the organization to show that you can produce good results without putting in risk all the organization. So I think there are ways to do it. Bold things, managing the risk in some way.
And I think as a CEO, the greatest sign of self-confidence you can show is a willingness to give up control just a little bit and let someone else have the freedom to challenge you.
Do you reckon the headhunters, when they're looking for a new chief executive, will say, are you humble? Is that a qualification you can bring to this job? I'm serious.
I think they will start to do it, because the headhunters probably are seeing that some of their candidates are staying 1-2 years in their role. So they are starting to think about it, I think.
All right, please, Andy.
Andy Newnham from University of Birmingham in the UK. My point was really, that I just put on Twitter, was there's too many, in most organisations that I see, especially in higher education, I suppose, there's too many levels of decision making, and you see it in government as well and in the private sector, where it's a way of spreading the risk, I suppose, to go through all those different levels. I think one of the ways forward that we've seen is really around taking educated risks, and you're employing people for a reason based on their experience and their knowledge, so take a chance on them and let them use that knowledge.
Do you see that happening, though?
in parts, in the good companies that we work with, and in the good universities in the UK and in the US, I think people are taking those educated risks, and they're paying off. Good example from our point of view at Birmingham is that we a few years ago we changed our strategy for how we accepted students. We've grown exponentially since then, and really seen the rewards, and that was a massive risk. We were the first university to do that in the UK, but it was a big educated risk. It wasn't wacky or bonkers.
Now, Andy, there's a second part of your question, which is, has bureaucracy broken the system? Do we have too many levels, which you just talked about, influenced by being risk averse? Do you subscribe to the risk aversion, which, in our judgment, not least from the people who are telling us, is one of the reasons why the unthinkables and the unpalatables are not actively being considered at the speed and with the intensity that's necessary?
My personal experience is that there's an enormous appetite for risk in running the business in the manner in which it's always been run. So going into dangerous countries, going into geologically difficult deposits, all of that stuff is well understood, and companies in this sector pride themselves on mastering that risk. They talk glowingly about their appetite for risk and their unique ability to manage risk and to optimize risk and so forth. There's a different set of risks which are completely outside the comfort zone and that are about the business model over time. And that's suddenly where you're taking an engineer who's done his entire career digging holes and being brilliant at finding something where no one else could, and saying, maybe you're in the buggy whip business. Then what happens? And that's very uncomfortable. And that's the kind of decision that many people, whether it's in this sector or any other sector, just don't want to be having.
We've got 8 minutes to run. Louise Nichols, where are you, please? I can't see hands going up, but can I come to you, please, about the connectivity of CEOs? Has a hand gone up from somewhere outside the room? Yes, over there, please, Louise. But Alessandro, just on this particular point, on risk aversion.
Yes, well, I think that I will call ordinary companies are designed in a way, and their governance are designed in a way to be risk averse. It's very difficult. I'm calling ordinary companies to take some risk. In the extraordinary companies, and I will define those companies, the companies that has a purpose and try to be aligned on those purpose, I think that it's much easier to take risk, because you need to be sure that the risk or the initiative is aligned.
But it's about the human
values.
Software taking risk as well, not feeling, to use that word again, oppressed in very changing circumstances.
No, it's human beings taking risk. Always, and again, when you are aligned with your values and your purpose, you feel more comfortable to take risk, and you see the opportunity, you don't see the risk, So I think that the way that most of companies are organized, they are risk averse a lot.
Louise, please, and I want to get as many questions in before we have to finish, please.
So my point was really about how do we create the culture that enables particularly the millennial generation to ask those more difficult questions, particularly to the CEO. How can the CEO be more connected?
I think, if I may say, that's a very critical part of our research because the millennials, this is a second and third stage of research, but it's very clear a lot of them are alienated now by the systems, which up to now have assumed that they will get millennials or that generation coming in. What do you think?
Well, Louise, I think that the first thing is the CEO should show vulnerability. And this is the way to connect with younger generation, with the employees at the floor of your plant. And again, this is tough for most of CEOs. But it's a magic way, to really connect and to really ignite people to say what they think about. But again, you need to be open to hear, because typically you are not going to hear nice things, you are going to hear things that are not working well, but this is the way to really connect and to be in contact with this new generation. But not only the millennials, but with the main stakeholders,
Remember what that very senior chief executive said, every chief executive senior, of course, but running a very significant consumer goods organization around the world, we are in danger of creating angry citizens and angry consumers, which is going to affect our business.
I think that CEOs need to leverage technology. So blogging is one. Now, I've talked glowingly about the blogging that we do. It's not perfect. And one thing that's not perfect about it is that people don't dare to write truly critical things when they're writing to the CEO because it's all attributable. And so I think there needs to be some mechanism that enables staff to communicate with the CEO in a manner that's protected so that they can say what they really think.
Do you recognize that language, which I've just picked out selectively, of bonkers, of wacky, of maverick? In other words, almost dismissing ideas simply by the description of them.
I think people self-censor before it even gets to that.
Okay. Gillian Lennart. Gillian Lennart, where are you, please? You've got experience of reverse mentoring, which has an intriguing sort of twist to it. Please.
Gosh, I did not.
Or shall I read it out then if you don't want to talk about it?
No, it's perfectly fine. I'm Gillian Lennart. I'm with CA Technologies. I'm one of the Green Biz 30 under 30. My family are entrepreneurs. I have experience speaking with COOs, CEOs in a bit of an informal environment, going to their summer houses, just friends, family friends. The interesting thing that I've found with CEOs and COOs is they're always learning, and I'm sure a lot of you are here. They're always looking to absorb, to understand. And sitting around a bonfire this summer with COO of a private company, he wanted to know about technology, about what we're doing, about what we're interested in. And it was a very informal conversation. And now, after speaking about reverse mentoring, I realized that what he was doing was trying to understand the environment that's coming up, trying to understand where the money's going to be coming from, because he looks at his son, his daughters, he looks at family friends like myself, and understands that we are the next investors. We're the people.
I think that's a very important point. I mean, if I can just interject.
Sure.
Could we get the microphone to Jorge Marinez as well, wherever you are, please? But one of the things we've discovered is that everyone wants to be very honest if you create the right atmosphere. Yeah. We call it beanbag conversations, which aren't really talking about what you want to talk about, but then you get revelations and a growth of confidence to express and share these views, exactly as you've just said. Karina.
No, I wasn't.
Alessandro.
No, totally agree. As I said, when you see the other one really vulnerable to have a direct conversation, you create the environment to say anything you want, independent who is in the other side.
All right. Jorge, where are you, please? Jorge Martinez. Please, over there. Thank you. Talking about those who were companies who survived on crushing mavericks.
Yeah, that was your quote, but I thought it was interesting, and it relates to the session this morning also, Georgette Medinez with BSR, thanks, is just that challenge around crushing mavericks and identifying leaders. And many of the folks in the room are that middle management folks that you had in the wall, and I just wonder realistically, when we say we want to be more open to ideas, I think we have to be very specific and say we're open to ideas with solutions and open to ideas with opportunities. And just thoughts on how you encourage that. One, I don't think actually most millennials have a problem raising their voice. I think it's the middle management is the one that has a problem raising their voice. They're the ones with kids and families. Yeah. And so I just wonder if you can speak to that. The challenge about getting middle management to, one, use that voice and getting them to, I had this question this morning, it didn't happen, to really empower that activity of creating the question and the challenge, but then empowering folks to have the time, which came up earlier on time, to actually develop that into solutions. Because otherwise we're hearing, but are we actually developing and moving that forward?
Karina.
Well, I should start by saying that I personally am prohibited from engaging directly with middle management or any management. That's just a rule that applies to all board members. However, sometimes I'm allowed to meet with people, and when I do, over lunch or whatever, it's Italy.
Has this been a dangerous gathering?
I mean, but for whatever reason, there's a rule and then it's breached. And when it's breached, can I tell you, I get my best intelligence talking to people in middle management who tell me what they're thinking, and I tell them what I'm thinking. Somebody described me as a volcano of ideas. I think that's a compliment. And to me, I see my role as enabling those ideas to make their way up the chain, because those ideas otherwise could get blocked.
Alessandro.
Well, I am luckier than Karina in this case. I am allowed to speak with people, and when...
Is it very different from when you were running a company?
No. In my case, no. I was lucky to work for a company that motivates people to speak. And, you know, the important part is when you are dialoguing with someone, you need to be present. You need to be real in the conversation. And most of times, or sometimes, people are there, but they are not there, you know? They're waiting until you finish to put what I think about. So
we're out of time here, but you'll get also asked, how do we find these mavericks? How do we, or these visionaries, and give them a sense of confidence at every level within the company, which means that if they choose to stay there, they can survive and flourish as opposed to be suppressed?
I think it's very possible to inspire people to come out of their shell when there's a change of management, there's a new direction. People, it's like seeds that just blossom again. The problem is when they're driven out of the company and they're lost.
And there are many of them.
Yeah, and they're lost to the company for good. But I think it's possible to resurrect that and to get people really participating in a creative and challenging way, but they need to be given that direction from the very top.
The data on that is not encouraging. Alessandro, last word, please.
I think that those mavericks are going to appear in an organization. I think that more connected we are becoming, easier is to find them. They are going to surge, they are going to appear. It's going to be very easy to find them.
Thank you very much indeed. Aaron, I hope what we've done is we've stimulated a discussion which really, in many ways, I'm sure many people are loath to stop at the moment. Let me tell you, the best parts always start after about an hour. When people are getting into it, they're working out what they can say, whether it's behind closed doors or in public, and much of it doesn't go on in public. But it's about the revelations, which that's what has driven much of our discussion. And I hope what we've done for BSR is move BSR in a direction which, given what is happening, given Unthinkables, given Unpalatables, at least generates a discussion among yourselves. And indeed, quite a few of you have already said you'd like to have a further discussion so we can gather outside here. And I'm told that BSR will also push out our document as well, so you have a chance to see what I've been talking about in a very headline form. It is 50 pages long, but the data is in there. Can I thank you both very much indeed? And thank you for asking.
Thank you.